The Galactic Council destroyed Earth. Humanity returned different. The signal came in at 03:47 ship time. I was not asleep. Nobody on the Perseverance was sleeping anymore. I am Kale Morrow. I study languages. I have spent my entire career learning how other species talk, how they argue, how they express love or fear or hunger. I became a xenolinguist because I believed that if we could understand each other clearly enough, conflict would become unnecessary. I was wrong about that. The signal was not encrypted. The Galactic Council did not bother encrypting it because it was not meant as a secret. It was a declaration. It was transmitted across every known frequency, in all 11 of the Council's primary languages, at maximum power. They wanted everyone to hear it. They wanted us to hear it most of all. I read the translation on my screen before the audio even finished playing. It said, by unanimous resolution of the Galactic Council, the species known as Homo sapiens has been classified as a Category 0 hazard to galactic stability. The solar system designated Sol 3 will be neutralized within 2 rotational cycles of Earth Standard Time. No appeal process exists for Category 0 classification. This resolution is final. 2 hours. They gave us 2 hours. Our captain, a quiet woman named Laura Finch, walked onto the bridge without a word. She read the same screen I was reading. She sat down in her chair. She did not speak for almost a full minute. Then she said, very calmly, "Lock the door." Nobody questioned her. Everyone just locked their station. What happened next, I have described in official reports, in personal journals, in recorded testimonies that will probably never reach another human ear. But none of those descriptions have ever felt accurate. None of them have captured what it is actually like to watch a planet die from a distance. The Perseverance had long-range optical arrays. They were designed for stellar cartography. We turned them toward Sol. Earth was there, round and blue and completely ordinary looking in the lens. Clouds moved across its surface in slow spirals. The Terminator line divided night from day in a clean curve. From this distance, you could not see cities. You could not see mountains or rivers. You could just see the color, which was the most beautiful color in the known universe, and which I have not seen since. The Council's weapon is not a beam or a projectile. It operates on a principle that human physicists had theorized but never built. It targets the resonant frequency of a planet's core and introduces a cascading oscillation. From the outside, it looks like the planet simply comes apart. Slowly, then all at once. It took 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I know the exact duration because I timed it. I do not know why I timed it. Perhaps because I needed something to do with my hands. Perhaps because some part of me, the part that was still a scientist, refused to simply watch without measuring. The first sign was a darkening at the equatorial band. Then fracture lines appeared, spreading across the surface like cracks in old glass. There was no sound, of course. Space does not carry sound. So all 4 minutes and 11 seconds happened in complete silence on that screen. 8 billion people. 8 billion. I keep coming back to that number even now, decades later, because my mind still cannot hold it. It keeps slipping away from me. I understand it abstractly. 8 billion. A number. But I cannot picture 8 billion faces. I cannot grieve 8 billion individuals. I can only grieve the idea of them, which feels like a betrayal because they deserved better than to be an idea. Laura did not cry. None of the senior officers cried. I think we were in a state that exists beyond grief, past the place where tears live. We had moved into a cold, airless region of feeling that I had no word for in English and later discovered had no word in any language I had studied either. The Perseverance carried 41 crew members. Across the 11 colony ships that had been operating outside the solar system at the time of the resolution, there were another 4,263 human beings. That was the entirety of our species. 4,300 people, scattered across 11 vessels in deep space, with no home to return to and no planet to call ours. Laura gave the order to scatter. Each ship would go dark and move to a prearranged set of coordinates, chosen randomly from our stellar charts, far from Council patrol routes. We would not broadcast. We would not transmit. We would exist in silence and decide later what existing even meant anymore. As we prepared to jump, I pulled up the targeting data the Council had transmitted as part of its official record. It was standard procedure for them, apparently. They logged the coordinates of each resolution for their historical archive: latitude, longitude, elevation, time of impact. I cross-referenced those coordinates with a personal file I kept on my tablet. My parents' home was at a specific latitude and longitude on a continent called Europe, in a country that no longer had a name because the country no longer existed. Their coordinates were inside the primary impact zone. I read that, and then I set the tablet down very carefully on the console in front of me, as if I were placing something fragile. I sat with my hands flat on my knees. I breathed in. I breathed out. Laura announced that we were jumping in 30 seconds. I did not move. I just kept breathing, because breathing was the only thing I was certain I still knew how to do. 29 seconds. 28. I thought about the last message my mother had sent me. It was mundane. It was about a plant she had bought for the kitchen. She was worried it was not getting enough sunlight, and she wanted to know if I thought she should move it closer to the window. I had not replied yet. 15 seconds. I made a decision in those 15 seconds that I have never regretted and have never been entirely sure was sane. I decided I was not going to spend whatever life remained to me in grief. Grief would come. I could feel it waiting just behind my eyes like a wave behind a seawall, but I was not going to let it be the thing that defined what humanity did next. We had something better than grief available to us. We had time. We had 4,300 people. And we had the fact that the Galactic Council had made one catastrophic miscalculation. They thought finishing us meant finishing us. 10 seconds. They did not understand that the most dangerous version of a human being is not the one with everything to lose. It is the one with nothing left to lose and a very long memory. 5, 4, 3, 2. The stars moved. And we were gone. 40 years is not a long time in galactic terms. Some of the species on the Galactic Council had been cataloging stellar phenomena since before our ancestors learned to farm. 40 years to them is a budget meeting. It is a footnote. It is the time between one administrative period and the next. To us, it was everything. I want to tell you that the exile was noble. I want to describe a species rising with dignity through darkness, holding onto its humanity with both hands. I want to give you poetry about survival. But the first 8 months were just people screaming. Not literally, not always, but there was a frequency to the silence on our ships that I can only describe as a sustained, internal scream. You could hear it in the way people stopped finishing sentences. You could hear it in the meals nobody ate and the shifts that got missed and the quiet arguments that kept appearing and disappearing like sparks on a wet surface. Our ship's psychologist, a man named Oliver Carey, told me privately that he was observing something he had no clinical framework for. He called it collective suspension. The entire crew had reached a state where their nervous systems had simply refused to process the full weight of what had happened. They were functional. They could do their jobs, but something underneath the function had gone very still. Oliver said he was not sure whether to treat it or leave it alone. He left it alone. He turned out to be right. Laura Finch kept the Perseverance on course through those months through what I can only call the purest form of routine I have ever witnessed. She established shift schedules and she enforced them gently. She made sure the food systems ran. She held crew meetings every 3 days, not to discuss the catastrophe, but to discuss practical things: fuel reserves, navigation, system maintenance. She gave people problems they could solve. Small problems, measurable ones. I think she understood something intuitively that took me years to articulate: that the mind, when it cannot process a loss of that scale, needs to be given a smaller problem to work on. Not because the smaller problem matters, but because the act of solving it keeps the machinery running until the machinery is ready for the bigger thing. By month 9, something had shifted. I noticed it first in the mess hall. People were talking again, not loudly, not the way people talk when things are fine, but they were talking, and what they were talking about was the future. Not Earth, not the Council, the future. A young engineer named Pete Calloway started it, I think. Pete was 23 years old. He had never lived on Earth. He had been born on one of the outer colony stations, and Earth was, for him, a place he had visited twice and remembered mostly through photographs. He came to me one afternoon with a datapad covered in equations and said, "I have been thinking about the generation problem." The generation problem was something nobody had said out loud yet. We had 4,300 people. We were going to need more, but more importantly, we were going to need them to be different. Pete's equations were the beginning of what would later become the adaptation program. I should explain what that means, because I think people outside our situation sometimes imagine it as something dramatic. They imagine laboratories and procedures and scientists in white rooms making deliberate choices about human evolution. It was not like that, not at first. It started with small things. The colony ship's medical systems had been designed for long-term deep space travel and included basic genetic support capabilities. Nothing experimental, just tools for managing radiation exposure and helping the body maintain itself in low-gravity environments. The engineers started extending those tools, carefully, with full crew consent, one modification at a time. The first generation of changes were all about survival, reducing the body's caloric requirements, improving cellular repair rates, extending the functional lifespan of nerve tissue in high radiation zones. Nobody woke up different. It was gradual. It was so gradual that you would only notice it when you looked at someone you had not seen in a year and realized they looked exactly the same as they had the year before, and the year before that. I was 34 years old when the exile began. By year 20, my biological age had effectively stopped advancing. I did not know this at the time. It was only when I saw old photographs of myself alongside newer ones that I understood what had been happening. Oliver Carey noticed it first clinically and brought it to Laura. She looked at the data for a long time. Then she said, "Good, we are going to need the time." Not every human accepted modification. I want to be clear about this because it matters enormously to what came later. Among the colony ships, there was a group, initially small, eventually numbering around 600, who refused any alteration. They were not hostile about it. They were not a faction in the political sense. They simply believed with great sincerity that the thing that needed to survive was humanity as it had been, unchanged, original, as close to what Earth had produced as they could keep it. They called themselves the Unaltered. Their leader, in the informal sense, they did not have formal leaders, was a woman named Grace Holland. Grace was a historian. She had been on one of the colony ships specifically to document human cultural history for long-term preservation. When the exile began, she redirected that mission slightly. She was no longer just preserving the past. She was keeping it alive. The Unaltered maintained Earth languages in their spoken forms, not just written. They cooked old recipes. They celebrated old holidays. They told old stories. When they had children, and they did in the old way without genetic support programs, they raised those children on the same memories so that the memory itself became inherited. I respected them enormously. I disagreed with them completely. And over the 40 years of exile, my disagreement never stopped being complicated. Because here is the truth. The unaltered were keeping something real. They were keeping the thing the council had tried to destroy. But the changed, and I include myself in this category, were becoming something the council had never imagined and could not have planned for. And that, it would turn out, was the point. I underwent my first significant modification in year 11. It was neural. Oliver and his team had developed a lattice, a network of synthetic tissue integrated with the brain's language processing centers that could support simultaneous active fluency in multiple languages. Not translation. Fluency. The difference matters. A translator hears one thing and converts it. The lattice meant I experienced all 11 council languages as parallel native thought streams. I agreed to it for practical reasons. I told myself it was a tool. What I did not anticipate was the effect it had on how I thought. When you hold 11 grammatical structures in active simultaneous use, something happens to the way your mind organizes reality. Each language contains a different architecture of causality, of time, of relationship. In one language I now carried natively, there was no tense for future events. Everything that had not yet happened was expressed as potential present. In another, the concept of individual identity was grammatically inseparable from the concept of community. You could not say, I decided in that language. You could only say, the group that includes me decided. I began to think differently, not less human, differently human. The grief was still there. It was always still there, but it was no longer the loudest thing in the room. By year 30, we were not the same species that had been erased. We were something related to it. We carried the memories. We carried the love of the thing we had lost. We carried the name. But we had grown into a shape that the Galactic Council, in its certainty, had not thought to fear. They had destroyed what we were. They had not considered what we might become. And in year 40, on a cold morning in ship time, Laura Finch walked onto the bridge of the Perseverance, sat down in her chair, and said the thing she had been planning to say since month 1 of the exile. She said, "It is time to go back." Nobody cheered, nobody wept. We just started plotting the course. Because we had been ready for a long time. The Vreth are a small species. Their home system sits about 12 light-years inside what the Council designates as its inner sphere of protected space. They have been members of the Council for about 600 years, and in that time have never caused trouble, never broken protocol, never failed to pay their administrative fees. They are, by galactic political standards, a model civilization. They also have no word in their language for what we were when we arrived. I know this because I can read Vreth. We came out of our jump at the edge of their system, in a formation that no ship registry in the Council's database would recognize. The Perseverance and 4 of the remaining colony ships. We had lost 3 to system failure during the exile, and combined 2 others for structural integrity. We're now running on propulsion systems that Pete Calloway and his engineering collective had spent 15 years quietly rebuilding from first principles. We were not faster than Council ships. We were quieter. There is a difference, and in the long run, quiet matters more than fast. The Vreth detected us 8 minutes after arrival. Their system defense network activated, which was expected. Their lead communication officer broadcast a standard challenge signal asking us to identify ourselves and state our classification under Council taxonomy. I answered, not in Vreth, in the Council's own administrative language, which is called Formal Galactic, and which almost no non-Council species bothers to learn, because it is extraordinarily complex and has not changed its grammatical structure in 2,000 years. I answered in perfect Formal Galactic with no accent and no hesitation, and I stated our classification using a category that did not exist in their database. I called us a newly registered independent civilizational entity filing for temporary passage rights under Section 44 of the Galactic Transit Accords. Section 44. I had spent 4 years finding that clause. It was old. It predated the Council's current membership by several centuries. It had been written to accommodate a type of space-faring culture that no longer existed and had never been formally repealed because nobody on the Council had any reason to think about it. Under Section 44, an independent civilizational entity, defined as a group of sentient beings operating without a registered home world, had the right to petition for 30 days of transit through protected space, provided they registered their presence and submitted to a non-invasive identity confirmation. The Vreth communication officer went silent for 43 seconds. That is a long time for a Vreth. They are not normally slow responders. Then she came back and said, in formal Galactic, that she needed to confirm our species classification for the identity record. I told her human. Another silence. This one lasted 1 minute and 17 seconds. Then the translation system produced a sound I had never heard from Vreth technology before. It was a long, flat tone with no linguistic content. It was, I realized after a moment, the sound the system makes when it receives a word it cannot categorize. The Vreth translator did not know what to do with the word human, because the Council's official records had classified us as terminated and removed us from the registry. To the Vreth system, I had just said we were something that did not exist. I told the communication officer, very gently, that I was happy to wait while she consulted her supervisor. She did. Her supervisor consulted the Council relay. The Council relay took 11 hours to respond, which meant someone at the Council level had actually been woken up in the middle of their administrative cycle to deal with us. I found that deeply satisfying. While we waited, I watched the rest of my team on the bridge of the Perseverance and thought about how different we looked from the crew that had scattered 40 years ago. The most obvious difference was age, or rather the absence of it. Every person in this room should have been elderly. Several should have been long gone. Instead, they looked like people in the middle of their lives. Healthy, sharp, attentive. But the subtler differences were what mattered more. The way people communicated had changed. We had developed not by design, but by 40 years of necessity, a form of rapid consensus building that an outside observer might mistake for telepathy. It was not. It was simply that we had lived together long enough and changed together enough that our decision-making had become extraordinarily compressed. What would once have required a 30-minute meeting could now happen in 30 seconds of shared eye contact and minor gesture. A woman named Diana Cross, who ran our diplomatic coordination team, leaned over and said quietly, "The Council is scared." I said, "Good, they should be curious. Scared is also acceptable." Diana almost smiled. She had a very controlled face, another thing the years had refined in us, not coldness but precision. We did not waste expression. The Council's response, when it finally came, was a formal demand that we halt our transit and submit to full inspection under the Eradication Verification Protocol. This was a real protocol. It was the procedure used to confirm that a terminated species had, in fact, been fully terminated. We submitted to it immediately, with complete cooperation. I made sure our cooperation was so thorough and so politely enthusiastic that it became, functionally, a form of pressure. 4 Council inspectors arrived on a shuttle. They were members of a species called the Sen, tall, silver-skinned, with large eyes designed for dim-light environments. They came aboard the Perseverance with scanning equipment and official tablets and expressions that conveyed absolute professional certainty. Those expressions lasted about 6 minutes. One of the inspectors, I will call him the lead because I do not know his individual title, stopped in the middle of our main corridor and simply stared at our engineering chief, a man named Callum Reed, who was walking past with a datapad and a cup of something warm. Callum is 109 years old. He looks 42. He has a neural modification that allows him to hold 7 simultaneous structural calculations in active working memory. His eyes, if you look closely, have a very faint secondary reflection pattern that the modification produces as a side effect. It is not alarming, just unusual, like a second layer of light inside the iris. The inspector stared at Callum's eyes for a long moment. Then he looked at me. I said, "Is there a problem?" He said, "What are you?" I said, "Human, as registered." He said, "Humans look like this." I said, "Some of us. We had a lot of time to ourselves." That evening, after the inspection was complete and the Sen had returned to their shuttle with their data and their very troubled expressions, Diana came to find me in the mapping room where I was running language drills. She said, "The council knows we are here. The real council, not just their relay system." I said, "I know." She said, "They are going to demand a formal response." I said, "I know that too." She said, "What do we do?" I opened a channel on the console in front of me. I had already written the message. I had actually written it 9 years into the exile, when I first started to understand what our return might look like. I had revised it every year since then. The current version was the 41st draft. It was addressed to the full council, all 11 species, all their primary chambers. It was written in all 11 of their languages simultaneously, in a single coherent document that read fluently in each tongue without the joins showing. This was not possible for any known non-council entity. It had taken me 30 years. The message said, "Humanity has returned. We would like to discuss our legal status and several matters of historical record. We are available at your convenience. We are patient. We have had a great deal of practice." It was signed, Cale Morrow, Representative, Independent Civilizational Entity, Human. I sent it. Then I turned off the channel and went back to my drills. Outside in the corridor, I could hear the ship running, systems cycling, people moving, the small, living sound of a species that had been told it was gone and had spent 40 years deciding what to do about that. We were not angry, not exactly. We were very, very focused. And in the council chambers, on 11 different worlds, in 11 different time zones, the message was arriving. I imagined them reading it. I imagined the pause before anyone spoke. I thought, "Good, take your time. We have been waiting far longer." I have given speeches in 17 languages. I have addressed creatures that breathe methane and creatures that communicate entirely through low-frequency vibration and creatures whose concept of individual identity is so different from ours that the word "I" requires a full paragraph of contextual explanation before it means anything to them. None of that prepared me for the tribunal. It was held in the council's primary chamber, which is a structure so large that it generates its own microclimate. The ceiling is so far above the floor that clouds form inside it during certain humidity cycles. The chamber was designed to communicate one thing above all else: you are small, and we are old, and the weight of our history will settle on you whether you welcome it or not. I walked in alone. This was not a symbolic choice. It was a legal requirement. The Council's resolution had classified humanity as a terminated entity, which meant we had no standing to send a delegation. I was technically present as a filing anomaly, a data error the Council had agreed to examine before correcting. I sat in the single chair that had been placed at the center of the floor. The chair was low. The Council representatives sat in elevated positions that curved around me in a horseshoe, each delegation behind a desk that was twice the height of a human standing. I do not think they designed the room that way specifically for me. I think that is simply how it was built, but the effect was the same. 11 species looked down at me. I looked back at all of them. The Council's lead speaker was a member of the Geln, the oldest species in the chamber. She was approximately 3 meters tall, with a body plan I can best describe as elongated and deliberate. Every movement she made was very slow and very precise, as if she had decided a long time ago that speed was undignified. Her name, translated into a form I could pronounce, was something close to Elder Vorath. I will call her Vorath. Vorath said, "You are the human designated Kale Morrow." I said, "I am." She said, "The Council's records indicate that the species to which you belong was formally terminated 41 years ago." I said, "The Council's records are incomplete." This produced a sound from the chamber that I can only describe as a very controlled version of outrage. Not loud. These were old species. They had long since evolved past loud. But the quality of the silence that followed was charged. Vorath said, "The termination was verified by inspection." I said, "The inspection confirmed that no humans were present in the Sol system. That is accurate. We were not in the Sol system at the time of the resolution. We have been in the outer galactic fringe for the past 41 years. The Eradication Verification Protocol, as written, only covers designated home territory. It says so in Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Protocol's founding document. I have the document here if the Council would like to review it." Another silence. A representative from the second delegation, a species called the Orin, who appear as dense columns of bioluminescent gas contained within articulated frames, shifted in a way that their translator rendered as, "This is a procedural argument." I said, "Yes. I thought it would be useful to begin with one, since this chamber was built to honor procedure." Vorath said, "The intent of the resolution was the termination of your species." I said, "With respect, Elder Vorath, intent is not law. This council has spent 2,000 years building a legal framework precisely because intent alone is insufficient. I am applying that framework. If the Council finds the framework inconvenient when applied to its own resolutions, that is a conversation worth having. But it is a different conversation from the one we appear to be having now." The Orin representative made a sound. The translator said, "You are very confident for a data error." I said, "I have had 41 years to prepare for this meeting." What followed was 6 hours of formal argument. I will not reproduce all of it, but I want to give you the shape of it because the shape matters. Each delegation presented the Council's case for reapplying the resolution. Their arguments fell into 3 categories. First, the original justification, that humanity's rate of expansion and resource acquisition represented a systemic risk to galactic stability. Second, the procedural argument, that the resolution, once passed, created a legal status that we could not argue our way out of from inside the chamber. Third, what I came to think of as the fear argument, which nobody stated directly but which I could feel underneath every other statement like a current under still water. We were different now. We had come back changed, and changed was frightening. I let them make their case. I took careful notes. I did not interrupt. When it was my turn, I did not address any of those arguments directly. I said, "I would like to present a document for the record." I submitted the Ethon archive. The Ethon were a species that had been erased by this council approximately 2,000 years ago. The official record listed them as terminated under a Category 0 resolution. The reason given was the same as the reason given for humanity: systemic risk, excessive expansion, threat to galactic stability. The archive I presented was a recovered record of everything the Ethon had known and built and discovered before they were gone. Our fleet had found it in year 18 of the exile, at a station in the fringe that the Ethon had built as a long-term data repository, apparently anticipating that someone might eventually come looking. I had spent 23 years translating it. The relevant section, which I presented to the chamber first, was the Ethon's complete medical research archive. 2,000 years of biological science from a species that had approached biology differently from any other known civilization. Their methods were extraordinary. Their results were more so. Among those results was a complete solution to the Vreth generational plague. The Vreth generational plague is a condition that has affected the Vreth species for the past 1800 years. It causes progressive neurological deterioration across generations. Each generation of Vreth is born with slightly reduced cognitive capacity compared to the one before. The Council's own medical researchers had classified it as irreversible 2 centuries ago and had not revisited the classification since. The Vreth had been slowly, generationally, losing ground for 1800 years, and the Council knew, and the Council's solution had been to classify the problem as unsolvable and move on. The Ethon had solved it. They had solved it 500 years before the Council erased them. The solution was in the archive. It had been sitting in a data vault at the edge of the galaxy for 2,000 years because nobody had gone looking, and nobody had gone looking because the Council had decided there was nothing to look for. I presented the solution to the Vreth delegation first. I had prepared a summary in their native language. The Vreth representative, a small, careful individual named Sen Vori, read the document for a long time. She did not look up for several minutes. When she finally did, her expression was one I had to search my expanded language catalog to categorize. It was the Vreth equivalent of someone who has just realized that a loss they had accepted as permanent is, in fact, recoverable. I said in Vreth, very quietly, "I am sorry it took so long to find it." She did not respond in words. She just held the document against her chest. I turned back to the full chamber. I said, "The Council erased the Ethon and called it stability. The Ethon's knowledge did not threaten galactic stability. It protected it. This chamber made a decision based on fear of what a species might do, without measuring what that species had already done. And the cost of that decision has been paid, every generation, by the Vreth, and by every other civilization that might have benefited from 2,000 years of Ethon science." Vorath said, "You cannot draw a direct line between the resolution and the Vreth condition." I said, "I can draw a direct line from the Ethon archive to the solution the Vreth need. The rest follows logically." I paused. Then I said, "I would also like to introduce Exhibit 2. Exhibit 2 was a technical report. It was prepared by Callum Reed and his engineering team. It detailed, in precise and boring specificity, the current operational status of the Council's eradication weapon system. Every component that had been manufactured, installed, maintained, or upgraded in the past 15 years had passed through a supply chain that included, at various points, a trading entity called Far Reach Industrial Cooperative. Far Reach Industrial Cooperative was registered in the name of a shell identity under Section 44 of the Galactic Transit Accords. It was us. We had spent 15 years replacing components. Not all of them. Enough of them. Enough that the weapon, if someone attempted to fire it today, would run a full startup sequence, complete all pre-launch checks, and then stop. It would stop because a very specific subsystem, a targeting verification module manufactured by Far Reach and installed 18 months ago during a routine maintenance cycle that the Council's own procurement office had authorized, would fail to confirm the target lock. It would not break. It would not explode. It would simply decline to proceed, and it would log the decline as a routine system hold, which would require 3 levels of technical review to investigate, during which time anyone in this chamber would be welcome to come and talk to us instead. The chamber was very quiet. I said, "We did not come here to threaten anyone. I want to be clear about that. We are not threatening. We are demonstrating that we had the capability to do something irreversible and chose not to. That choice was deliberate. It reflects a value system that this Council categorized as a danger and that I would invite this Council to reconsider." The Sen delegation conferred. Then their speaker said, "You infiltrated a Council weapons system." I said, We participated in a competitive procurement process for a maintenance contract and won it fair and square. The full documentation is in Exhibit 2, Appendix 3. The Orin representative made a sound that the translator rendered after a pause, as, "This is either the most dangerous species we have ever encountered or the most disciplined one." I said, "We have spent 40 years learning that the difference between those two things is intention, and our intention today is to talk." Voreth said after a long moment, "What do you want?" I said, "A new charter. One that applies to all species, one that prevents this council from making unilateral extinction decisions without review by an independent body that includes representation from non-council civilizations, one that requires the council to share scientific archives rather than allowing knowledge to disappear when a species is terminated, and one that gives humanity full legal recognition as a living civilizational entity, with all the rights that entails." She said, "And if we refuse?" I looked at her. I held the look for a few seconds. Then I said, "Then we file for an extended stay under Section 44, make ourselves comfortable, and continue participating in maintenance contracts." Nobody laughed, but I think a few of them wanted to. The two Vreth representatives had already moved. Quietly, without announcement, they had crossed the chamber floor and were now seated on the side of the room behind me. Not beside the council, behind me. By the end of the session, 2 more delegations had shifted. Voreth watched this. She was very old and very composed, and I could not read her expression fully. But when the session was suspended for recess, she looked at me for a moment before she left, and she said something in the oldest form of formal Galactic, a variant so archaic it was used only in ceremonial contexts. It translated, roughly, as, "You are not what we expected you to be." I said, "No, we never were." I want to tell you the end, clearly because it deserves clarity. The Galactic Council did not collapse. It did not fall apart dramatically or lose power in a single moment. It changed. That is more accurate and in some ways more remarkable. The new charter took 11 months to negotiate. I led the human delegation. Grace Holland led the unaltered delegation. We had not agreed on much in 40 years, but we agreed on the charter completely, which told me that despite everything, despite the modifications, despite the divergence, despite 4 decades of different choices, we were still the same species underneath. We still wanted the same things. We still believed that people deserved to be safe, and that knowledge belonged to everyone, and that no single group of old powers should be allowed to decide who lives and who does not. The charter created the Galactic Review Commission. It was a new body with 11 permanent seats and an additional 22 rotating seats drawn from non-council civilizations by democratic selection. Any resolution affecting the survival or legal status of a species now required a 2/3 majority from the full commission, with a mandatory 100-day review period during which the species in question had the right to present evidence. It was not a perfect document. Grace told me so the morning we submitted it. She said, "There are 17 things wrong with this and we both know it." I said, "There are probably more than 17, and we can fix them. That is the point. We wrote something fixable." She nodded. Then she said very quietly, "Do you think they would be proud of us?" I did not ask who she meant. I knew. I said, "I think they would be amazed, and a little confused and proud." The Ethon archive was released on the day the charter was ratified. Not to the council, to everyone. Every species with a receiver capable of picking up a broadband signal received the full archive simultaneously. Every medical record, every scientific paper, every philosophical text, every piece of music and art the Ethon had produced in their entire civilizational history. 2,000 years of a species' life, broadcasted across the galaxy in a single transmission. We had spent 3 years formatting it properly so it would be readable by the widest possible range of receiver systems. Callum's team did that work. They were very proud of it. The file structure was genuinely beautiful, technically speaking. The Vreth received their plague solution. I will not detail the medical procedure because I am not a doctor, but I will tell you that 6 months after the charter was ratified, Sen Vori sent me a message. It was short. It said, "The first children of the new generation have been born. They are well." I read that message 4 times. Then I added it to a folder I keep on my personal tablet labeled Reasons. The folder has a lot of entries now. Our fleet, which had grown as scattered ships slowly found each other and joined our formation across the months of the tribunal, numbered 22 vessels by the time the charter was signed. Across those ships, there were approximately 12,000 humans. In the 41 years since the resolution, we had grown. Not quickly, carefully, with intention. Of those 12,000, roughly 900 were unaltered. The rest were changed in varying degrees. Pete Calloway's daughter, a young woman named Rose, was the first human born with the neural lattice already integrated. She had not chosen it the way I had. It was simply part of her, the way language is part of anyone. She spoke 16 languages before she was 15. She was also very funny and loved old Earth card games, which she played ruthlessly and won almost every time. Rose was, to me, the clearest evidence that we had not lost ourselves in the changing. She was new and she was completely, recognizably human. The ship named Earth launched 3 months after the charter. It was the largest vessel we had built. It carried a crew of 400 and a full terraforming payload and enough seed stock and genetic archive material to begin the reconstruction of Earth's biosphere from scratch. The projected timeline for a breathable surface was 260 years. For a livable surface, 340. I would be there for it. I had that long now. But I would not be on the ship. I had other work to do. There were 22 non-council species that had applied for review commission seats, and they all needed legal guidance on the process. There were 6 archive civilizations besides the Ethon that needed to be located and recovered if anything of them remained. There were 43 diplomatic relationships to build from scratch with species that had spent 2,000 years under a council that had never asked their opinion about anything. I had lists. I am a person who makes lists. It is a very human thing. On the day the Earth launched, our entire fleet gathered in formation. Every ship side by side in the open space between council territory and the fringe. We watched it go. The ship was large, but space is larger, and it became a point of light and then a smaller point of light, and then the stars absorbed it. Nobody cheered, nobody cried. We just watched until it was gone. Then Laura Finch, who had been at my side for 41 years and who looked, if anything, slightly more formidable than the day I had met her, said, "All right, back to work." And that was that. I went back to my cabin that night and I sat at my desk and I opened a document I have kept since year 1 of the exile. It is just a running record. Things that happened. Things we decided. Things we built and lost and found and built again. I added an entry. It said the charter is signed. The archive is released. The Earth is on its way home. We are all still here. Then I sat for a while. It was quiet. Ship quiet, which is a particular quality of silence, mechanical hum underneath, the sense of something vast and alive around you. 41 years and I still loved that sound. I thought about my mother's plant. I had thought about it more times than I could count over the years. I had no idea what kind of plant it was. She had never said. I had never asked. I thought about how strange it is that grief lives in the small things, not the enormous losses. Those are too big to hold in your hands. But a plant you never saw, in a kitchen that does not exist, in a country that is a memory of a memory that fits, that you can carry. I thought, I am going to find out what kind of plants Earth had. I am going to learn all of them, every species, every name. And when the terraforming is done, 300 years from now, and someone walks out onto the surface of Earth and breathes real air for the first time in 3 centuries, I want there to be a garden there. With the right plants. I opened a new document and started making a list. Outside, the stars moved past the window as the Perseverance traveled on. The galaxy was very large and very old, and had spent 2,000 years thinking it knew everything that mattered. We were going to show it something new. Not because we had won. Not because we were stronger or smarter or more dangerous than what we had been before. But because we had chosen in the coldest and hardest place available to any people to keep going, to keep asking questions, to keep building things, to keep leaving the light on for whoever came next. That is what we are. That is what we have always been. And now the galaxy knew it too.